Hi everyone, I'm Catherine, the artist behind Bigelow Fine Arts. How did the big meteor turn out? I'd really love to know. I just started up on MeWe and would love to build a coloring community there with everyone. If there is enough interest, I'd love to start a group for everyone to share their art, talk art, and discuss supplies. It is free to join MeWe and participate. Just skip the free trial. I'm moving on to these two smaller meteors today. My pencils are in my hand and I am ready to get going. Come along and join me and let's color this in together. I began with the purple pink for this tall, thin, grassy coral, filling in all the long, thin branches in a good layer of pink. I went over it again to make sure I had good coverage, although I think I could have sharpened my pencil a little more. For the most part, now that I have decided what color each type of coral is, I am working them in their color with minor changes. This not only makes it easier to figure out what color something should be, but makes it easier to move forward quickly. The minor changes come in when I can't remember exactly what order I worked up the colors, or if I lean more heavily on one color or another. Variation is fine, as life is variegated. I came in with the magenta to add in a shadow at the base of the coral. I blended that in with more pink. I brought in my dark sepia to add in a bit of shadow at the very base of the fronds. This finger coral is next. I'll be coming in with the cobalt green for a light base layer over all the finger coral I can find on this little meteoroid. With the grass green, I'm going to fill in the tips of the fingers and bring it down a little into the base of the coral. I bring it down to help with the blend a little bit. Plus, I know some of it will get covered with the blue-greenish. I put in a layer of the phthalo blue around the base of the fingers, beginning to blend colors together and define some of the shadows. Here comes the sepia. I'll darken up the shadows that I blocked in with the blue, blending them together. I do go around some of the fingers to help them pop up off the background of the coral, both with the phthalo blue and the sepia. For the shelf coral, I have not been really happy with the color combinations I have been using, but I'm going to stick with it. I used the blue-greenish for a very light layer over the whole coral. I'm not even sure why I'm not happy with it. It's a fine color and it seems to work with the other colors around it. I define the shadows with the dark sepia. They are under the shelf and along the stem part of the coral. I then used the light phthalo blue to lighten up the edge of the shelf. I come back in for another layer with the blue-greenish to darken up the shadows even more. I gave the shelf a touch of cobalt green, but I didn't think it improved the colors for me. Moving on, I am working up the bubble coral, layering in several layers with the light cadmium yellow over all the bubbles and anything that might look like a bubble in the background. With the orange, I want to color most of the bubble, leaving just a small crescent at the top of the bubble for the yellow to show through. I do the same with the scarlet, keeping the color mostly to the base of the bubble where the shadows would be, but also blending it up into the orange a little. I add in another layer with the yellow, which also helps to blend the colors together more. I touch up the orange, giving it another layer and lightly tinting the yellow crescent so it doesn't stand out quite so much. I darken my shadows with the sepia, keeping them to the bottom of the bubbles and in between where a shadow would form. I put another layer of orange over the shadows to bring it all together. I wasn't sure what color to do the wavy coral in the back, so I opted to go with the pink again. I guess it could have been yellow with red as well. I put in several layers with the purple pink over all the strands. The magenta comes in to darken up the base of the strands, and the sepia helps to really define the shadows. I add in another layer with the purple pink, and this meteoroid is almost finished. I come back in with the green to touch up the tips of the finger coral. I didn't think I got them bright enough compared to other corals of the same type. I bring in the yellow lemon for more brightness for the green tips. The chunk of rock is worked up the same way I worked up the background sections on the large meteor. I put down a base layer of the warm gray 5 over the whole rock, adding in extra layers where the lines show shadows. I then used the sepia over the shadowed areas to darken them even more. I touched up the shadows on the finger coral again with the phthalo blue. I'm now moving on to the other little meteoroid hiding behind the palette. This brain coral thing is first. I put in several layers of ivory over the whole coral. I really wanted to block off the paper so new colors laid on top would be lighter. With the orange, I came in around the holes to add in some color and fill in the holes. There are a couple of large bubble coral nearby, so I'm hitting them up with a base layer of the orange as well. Back to the brain coral. I put in a layer of the ivory again to blend everything together. I use the scarlet to fill in the holes both on the brain coral and the bubble corals. I give several layers as I want them to be dark. I blend out the bubble coral with the cadmium yellow, and while I have that in hand, I begin the tall finger coral. I add several layers over all of them, trying to fill in the thin sections very well. I am not going to have any other colors going all the way up into the long fronds, so I want good coverage. When I finished the long coral fingers, I noticed a small bubble coral, so I gave that a base layer with the cadmium yellow as well. For this small meteoroid, I am working a little more by color than by coral type. Coming back in with the orange, I add in a layer of orange to the bubble coral, leaving a crescent of yellow at the top. I give the large bubble corals another layer with the orange to further fill in the tooth of the paper and to bring up the saturation of the color. I can tell I don't have enough layers on, as the color is a little faint. I put in a touch of orange at the base of the long finger coral. They will be getting scarlet in the same places, but I can block in the area with the orange as well. Time for the scarlet. I add in shadows to the holes in the bottoms of the bubble corals. The long finger coral also gets its red base and veining up into the lower part of the fingers. I blend out the scarlet with the cadmium yellow and come back in with the scarlet to add in a shadow to the small bubble coral I missed. With the dark sepia, I am darkening up the shadows at the base of the corals as well as filling in some of the background spaces that are already marked as shadowed by the artist. There is more long wavy coral here on this meteoroid, so I am going back to the purple pink, adding several layers to fill in the long strands. I fill in a few other bits behind the yellow coral that might be part of the same coral, or maybe not. I then bring in the magenta to darken up the bottom of the coral and create the effect of shadows. The sepia goes in at the very darkest part of the coral, mostly just at the base. This coral that reminds me of a carrot is next. I am coming in with the yellow lemon for a base layer. With the green, I am coloring in the leafy top. I put in several layers in the tiny space as this is the only color it will receive. I put in the shadow on the side with the dark sepia. Remember, it's barrel-shaped, so we want the dark sepia to be darker on the one side and then fade up into the middle. I add more layers along the edge with fewer layers in toward the middle. I add a layer of green over the shadow and more on the leafy top. I decide this long coral on the bottom matched the other long ones close enough that I should make it yellow with a red base. So I'm giving it a few layers of the cadmium yellow, followed by scarlet at the base. I blend with the orange and give it a touch of shadow with the sepia. And that's done. These strange flat corals are like a mix between the shelf coral and the finger coral. I'm going to treat them like finger coral, coming in with a cobalt green for a base layer over all the coral that match. I use the grass green on the tops of the fingers on the flat part. I'm filling in most of the flat top of the coral and not sticking to just the fingertips. With the yellow lemon, I come in and brighten up the green with a layer. I also hit the tops of the fingers on the other meteoroid covered by the palette. I take the blue-greenish and begin defining the shadows and filling in a little of the pad part going around the fingers to help define them a little better. Most of the color is going on the outer part of the coral and the stem. I also gave the tiered coral a layer of the blue-greenish as it is a similar color. I bring in more cobalt green to keep going around the green fingers. The rock jutting out here gets a layer of warm gray 5 with extra layers where the shadow is already noted. I add sepia to the shadows to darken them up even more. I missed a bubble coral here on the end, so I hit that up with a layer of the orange, then used the scarlet in the crevice to add shadow, and blended it with the cadmium yellow. I used the cadmium yellow on the green fingertips, but came back in with the yellow lemon for additional layers. Back to the tiered coral. I'm using the light phthalo blue on the edges of each tier to lighten up the blue. I bring in more of the blue-greenish for shadows at the base of the coral and darken them up with sepia. Since I have the sepia in hand, I go around and touch up shadows all over the meteoroid. Mostly I'm procrastinating on the large fan as I'm not sure what color it should be. Seems they can be all different colors, so I opted for something pink and red. I came in with a light layer of pink followed by a light layer of scarlet with some extra layers on the veins. I blend out with another layer of pink followed by a shadow with sepia and some magenta for more shadow and along the veins to help them stand out more. Tomorrow I'll be moving on to another couple of clumps of coral further up, so stay tuned for that. I hope you've been following along. Please let me know. I'd love to know how your corals look. I have my social media links below. Find me on Twitter, Instagram, MeWe, and Patreon. Patreon has a short write-up as well as all the palettes I'm using and a list of the timestamps. You don't have to support me to see it. If you have any questions or page requests, please leave them below or reach out to me on social media. I put in a list of chapter breaks in the show notes as well as a list of equipment I like to use. If you use any of the affiliate links, it really helps me out without costing you a thing. I want to thank you all so much for coming along and joining in with me on this coloring journey. I appreciate all my subscribers and look forward to more of you joining in and coloring along with me. Please like, share, and subscribe to help that happen. Until next time, happy coloring!